Hi, Lynton here, and welcome to all the Year 10 students at Brisbane Boys College. This is usually the time that I'm with you, enjoying your hospitality and spending time in your chapel and assemblies and classrooms. And for the first time in 26 years, I am not able to come. I'm down here in Victoria in lockdown, and I know where I'd much prefer to be. But anyway, welcome to this series of talks. This is the first of two that I'm going to give for your unit that you will be looking at and exploring, which is looking at drugs and drug addiction and life transformations. And it's a privilege for me to just share a little bit that hopefully will add to your understanding and discussions. And it's a little bit of my own story, my own journey. It actually is the reason why I do what I do with my art and storytelling. And I'll explain that a little bit down the track. But first of all, I'm going to do a painting, and then I'm going to share some thoughts about this particular painting. More that I would be doing to this painting, but I'd like it to be a symbolic painting. It's of nowhere in particular, but hopefully you can recognise that it is a waterfall. It actually reminds me of some of those hot, humid days that I would experience when I was living up in Brisbane and then later on the Gold Coast. Friends, myself, we would go up into the hinterlands and we would follow the stream back up into the higher parts of the rainforest and look for those mountain shallows, streams, water holes, just to sit in and relax. And so this is really where I would like to take you in your imagination. If we can imagine that we're going back up the stream, way up into the rainforest and to one of those shallow places where the current isn't all that strong, it's shallow, and it's a great place to hang out with your friends. And the reason I am wanting us to begin there is because that is where my story begins with addiction. Now, I just need to say, when we are talking about drugs, of course, it is a huge area, and you'll be looking at this, I guess, in your own course. We live in a world that is awash with all sorts of drugs, legal and not legal. We have nicotine, we have alcohol, which is probably the most highly used and destructive drugs in our country. But we have over-the-counter prescription drugs. We have glue sniffing and petrol sniffing and spray can sniffing. There are all sorts of things that are highly addictive that you can kind of get involved in. But for me, it was the illegal drugs, and that's where I begin my journey. And again, as I talk about illegal drugs, even that has changed and evolved since I was into that. There's so much more around today, and highly more potent and even dangerous. But broadly, drugs can be put into two categories. You have your uppers and downers. Now, your downers, of course, include alcohol. They depress your neurosystem. But the other, I guess, illegal downers would be marijuana and cannabis and heroin, hash. They are the ones that kind of slow everything down, and they're the ones that the messages between the brain and the body just get cranked down, and they give there's a plane overhead. They give that sense of just feeling really euphoric and pleasurable. They relax you, they can relieve pain, and the uppers, do exactly the opposite. They increase those messages between your brain and your body. They're often called speed, but they are the ones like cocaine and meth, ice, and or your party drugs, and ecstasy and LSD and acid. They are the ones where your sense, everything is heightened and sped up. Your heart rate increases incredibly. All your senses, from touch to smell to what you think you're seeing, hallucinating, it's all kind of going at a rapid warp speed. And once you've taken those drugs, you're kind of on it for hours. You can't just suddenly decide to step off the train. You're on it, and you can be on it, for a long time. So for me, when I think about my beginning, it didn't come through some stranger forcing drugs on me. It came in the context of back up in the stream with my friends, but it wasn't in a stream, it was actually in a house up on the Sunshine Coast. I used to go with my friends weekly up to surf there, and it was a Friday night, and the music was playing, there was lots of alcohol, but then someone passed around some marijuana, some cannabis. And in that context, with your friends, all the messages that I kind of had in my head about warnings about not taking drugs and what it can do to you kind of just went out the window, because there were much stronger forces at play when you're with your group and with your friends, and when you're wanting to be accepted, as well as wanting to just have a pleasurable time. That was the force that was very strong for me. And I wanted to push the boundaries also. I didn't want anyone to be telling me what to do and what not to do. I would find out for myself. Thank you very much. And also, it was a way for me to transcend, to not think about who I really was, but to become someone different, to change or alter the state of my mind or sense of self. I was an introvert, very insecure, not really liking who I was, and drugs could make me put on a whole new set of identity, to be more extroverted, to be out there and to be doing stupid and crazy things. So I'd like to now just go back, and I'll just put a little bit more detail on this picture. If you can imagine upstream, you're in the water with your friends, but then there comes that time when you kind of think, why not just go a little bit deeper? Why not just sort of step out into the deeper part of the stream, maybe up to my waist, maybe up to my neck, and be more immersed in it. And that for me was again what it was like with my journey into drugs. It wasn't all that long when drug taking for me was not something that I would just look forward to for a weekend recreational experience or a party drug. It was something that I was doing more and more regularly. And it was becoming almost daily. And that happened very, very quickly. And also I started to realize that, as you will talk about, is that drugs have what we call the law of diminishing returns. Whatever you experience in that initial trying of it, that first hit, that first exhilarating kind of high that you have, you will never go back to that if you take the same amount. You need something stronger, you need more of it, or you need to mix your drugs to try and get back to that taste of heaven, as we used to call it. Or for those who are heroin addicts, it's called chasing the dragon. That fire, that initial hit and high, you're forever trying to chase it. And so you become more of a risk taker in not just what you're taking and how much and what you're mixing, but also who you are dealing with, the people you are mixing with. And I, again, would just like to put this out as something to think about and to talk about, and that is that once you start sourcing drugs, you can't just go down to the local Coles or Woolies and find a container there with all the ingredients on. You have to get it usually through your friends or someone who knows a friend who knows a dealer, and you never know where it is coming from. And you care less and less about that. But let's be honest here. People who make drugs, manufacture them, aren't dressed in white, sterile lab coats in sterile laboratories, mixing the same ingredients carefully, thinking about your welfare. From the source of those drugs, right down the line to all those who deal it, all they are thinking about is not your welfare, but to make money. And that usually means they don't care about what goes into those drugs. And it could be as something as stupid as just white powder to bulk it up and make it look like the real stuff. It could be washing detergent, it could be rat poison, it could be arsenic. And even if it's not in the first pure stuff, it gets cut on the way down. And you don't know what has gone in it, you don't know where it's come from. And even if you do trust your source initially and then you start mixing it with other things, you don't know how those chemical reactions are going to take place in your body and in your head. But as I said, I cared less about that because I was much, much deeper in it. And all I was thinking about is just maintaining that high. It sort of borders on the stupid sometimes. I only share this in this context. But I can remember there was, for a period of time, there were these sticks, they were called Buddha sticks, that were doing the rounds. And we were told, these are amazing. Not only have they got heads of marijuana, cannabis sort of tied on the stick, but they're coated in hash oil and also with a secret ingredient that will give you a real high. And I can remember we used to, take bits of this and roll it with their cigarettes and smoke it and just say, this is good shit. And that's exactly what it was. We found out later that these Buddha sticks, yes, there were heads of cannabis there was hash oil, but the secret ingredient that all of this was coated in was goat dung, goat shit. We were smoking that and thinking that we were special. But of course it can be a lot more dangerous and harmful. And so imagine that you are up in that current and you decide to, because up until now, as I did, you could think you can see the shore, you think, yeah, I can just sort of dig my heels in and push against the current, I can get out any time I like. But then you decide to lift your feet up and just let the current take you further downstream. You want to be a bit more risky. Yeah, I can get out, I can swim across. If I want to, I can get out. But at the moment, I'm just going to go with the flow. The current is stronger, and as you look back, where you began is a long way out of sight. And that's how it was me for after a number of years. I was a very different person to when I first began. And for me, going downstream was turning into a person that deep down I did not like. But again, I wasn't thinking too deeply about it. My attitude to everything had changed. My parents, those who were in my family, the relationships were very, very destructive. From my point of view, they had all broken down. They were still there for me. They were still trying to help me and reach out to me, but I just kept pushing them away and telling them not to interfere in my life. I can handle this. I was becoming incredibly self-centered because all I was thinking about was myself and my need for drugs and just to get through that day. And so that affects everything from your work. My attitude to work was lousy. I had no more life dreams really to speak of, other than make money and have lots of drugs and be in a nice place to do it. But as far as really doing something with my life that was going to be life-giving to others around me, that was long gone. And there were no natural highs anymore. I can still remember one weekend. We were in a friend's place down in the basement. There was one little window in this room, and I could see the blue sky outside. But we were stuck in this dingy, dark basement, and there was no laughing, no fun, no sinking back in the beanbag and a big smile on your face saying, "This is fantastic," because you see, no one had been able to score or get some drugs. And we didn't know what to do with ourselves and with that day. And I can remember glancing up at the window and seeing the blue sky, and it was almost as if an audible voice spoke to me, and it was simply this: "Lynton, what are you doing here?" I looked around to see if someone had actually asked me that, but no one was even looking at me. I quickly forgot about it, didn't respond to it, but I do remember it clearly now. But that's where I was, and not only could I not enjoy just the natural things, the blue sky, the sunshine, walking along the beach, going for a drive out in the bush, there are also a lot of more bad trips occurring, because drugs can also take you not on a good trip, again depending on the state of your mind and depending on what's going on around you and depending on what you're taking, you can go on a bad trip where you are. And for me, I was experiencing things that were bringing absolute terror to me, sensing that I was going to die for all eternity and drop into this bottomless pit. I was meeting entities and personalities that were evil and not being able to know what to do with that, because once you're on a trip, you're on a trip. You can't get out of it. And coming out of it gradually, absolutely terrified and fearful, but not enough to stop me. You just go on to thinking the next one's going to be better. And so as you come down, you get dragged further down that stream, you start to hear the sound of the waterfall. And if you ever go up into the hinterlands to Purlingbrook Falls after a lot of rain, you hear that thundering sound through the rainforest. And I want you to imagine that as you get closer to the precipice as the water crashes over. And for me, that sound of the waterfall was that deep sense of I'm getting very close to a point of no return. I couldn't put my fingers on it, I couldn't explain it, but I just sensed that this was not going to end well for me. There are a whole lot of different reasons for that, but before I get to those, I just want to make a couple of points here. And one is that point of no return. If you imagine the volume of that water going over, it could be here, it could be back here, it could be back here. It all depends on how much water is going over the precipice, how much force there, to that point where you cannot get out, even if you try with all your might. And that point of no return is going to be different for every person. You don't know what kind of stuff that particular drug or pill you take is going to affect, it's going to have on your brain. You could have people that you point to, whether they are music idols who boast about being on drugs all their life, whether it is sporting stars who say, yeah, I took drugs, I'm still fit and I'm still playing. But I can point you to many more who that is not their story. And it could be just after one cigarette with very high potent cannabis in it that can just do irreversible damage, give you a psychotic turn in your head and it melts your brain and you're never the same after. It could be things that happen to you physically, just wrecking your organs, whether it's your heart or whether it's other stuff. I mean, there are so many points of no return that happen to people and it ends in a tragic way. But for me, I was sensing I was getting near that point. I was playing Russian roulette because that's what happens. You might say, well, I'm here to talk about it, but every time you take a pill, every time you smoke a joint, every time you do something with drugs, it's like pointing a gun at your head and pulling the trigger. Russian roulette. Some of my friends were already dying from overdoses. One of the ways that can happen is that you're used to taking, say, that much, I mean, and that's more than what it was, but say that much of the drug, and because it's been cut, it's not as potent, and then for some reason a more potent brand comes along, and without thinking you ingest or smoke, take the same amount of drug and you overdose. It could be, again, a mix of drugs. My friends were dying. My friends were also dying from taking their own lives because it was just messing with their heads mentally, as it was with mine. My periods of deep, deep depression were much longer, going for days, and I couldn't get out of them. And in that dark space, in that mental space, there were lots of destructive thoughts, self-harming thoughts. And drugs was only making it worse, not helping. High levels of anxiety, high levels of stress. But I couldn't get out. There was also a sense of I'm losing my friends just through carelessness. You do stupid things. It depends. You could be on drugs and go driving, riding a motorbike. You can take a particular drug and think you can fly and you jump off a building. I know it sounds silly, but that's what happens. I can remember being at a 21st party with my drug dealer, and we're all in this, we'd rented out this building. There was a lot of drugs there, and we were waiting for someone to come who had just spent a lot of money building his Harley Davidson up into a beautiful bike with beautiful paintwork on it and paintings on it, and he was riding it over. And then the news came through that he had been crossing over the Hornibrook Highway, the old Hornibrook Highway, to get to the party. He'd been dressed in, of all costumes, a nun's costume. It was a bit of a fancy dress party, and he had hit a truck head on. Now, whether it was an accident, deliberate, we never will know. But I do remember that as we heard that, do you know what we did? We laughed about it. We joked about it. Because there was no empathy at all. We didn't really care. And I'm really ashamed of myself for that night. My life had gone, been taken away, and all we did was laugh about it. Why am I here? Why didn't I go over that waterfall? I'm going to say that it was because of an amazing event that took place, of not of my own doing. Not because I did suddenly find and muster the willpower to get across to the shoreline or hold on to something and get out. I didn't have any of that left. But something happened that gave me a second chance of life, and I'm going to illustrate it just in a bit of a fun way with this little carving that I have made. It's a carving of a grub, and I I'm going to use this as a way to just summarise where I'm going to go with my next talk, number 2, part 2. This little grub I designed, put a lot of thought into how I carved this grub. I designed this grub to do something pretty amazing, and that is to be able to balance out on the tip of my finger and stay there without me holding on with this hand or any other fingers. No sticky tape or anything, just out on the tip of my finger. For that to happen, there needs to be what we call a state of equilibrium, where the power of gravity is overcome by another power. And that power comes in the shape of a leather belt. And I have cut a little mouth with the grub so that this little guy can hold on to the belt. And that belt, even though it seems counterintuitive, even though it seems crazy, that belt is the opposing power that's going to allow this grub to stay out of my finger in a state of equilibrium and not fall. Now this little grub, just imagine if it has a brain and it actually decides, look, I don't need to hold on to this belt. I just want to be myself. I can figure this out myself. No matter how hard it tries to stay out there, that power of gravity will take over and it will always fall. And I actually dropped this grub once on the cement, so I'm just grabbing him so it won't happen again, but I dropped him and his head snapped off. It can be very painful for a little grub. But that's what's going to happen. And this is very much like me. Maybe you see a bit of yourself in this grub. And that is in this amazing story that we call the God story, of God's incredible love for us. God created us in God's own image, that we were to be connected to that life source, that energy source. And in that connection, we could actually become what we were meant to be and express God's character, God's nature in all its amazing variety of ways through our personalities and giftings in this world, and actually really do something that's meaningful. But like this little grub, I decided I don't need to have that connection with God, with my maker. I can do this on my own. And like this little grub, no matter how hard I tried, I found that I was always falling short of not only who I wanted to be and tried to be, but deep down what I sensed God wanted me to be. I just couldn't do it, and drugs simply just accelerated that fall to destruction and self-harm. But there came a moment, an opportunity to reconnect, and I'll be talking about that in my next part. But in that reconnection, I found that just as I now let go of this hand, no fingers, that was what I'd been looking for, that missing part, to overcome not just that pull of my life, but to lift me up and to bring out the best in me, to help me become that person that God wanted me to be. Not of my own doing, I just can't do that myself, but to actually help me become complete and whole. Thank you for listening, and have a colourful day.